In a small-town diner, a disabled female veteran sat quietly, her wheelchair a symbol of sacrifice, until 3 thugs decided to make her their target. Their cruel laughter echoed as they tipped her chair, sending her crashing into a booth. A shattered cup, a spilled tray, and a room full of silence followed. But exactly 30 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up and 3 uniformed heroes stepped out. Ready to set things right, Elena Martinez sat at her usual spot at the Faded Daisy Diner, tucked into the far-right corner beneath a flickering neon sign that buzzed faintly, its light casting a pale glow over her worn denim jacket. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and fried grease, the air thick with the hum of a tired ceiling fan that did little to ease the midday heat. The checkered floor was sticky under the wheels of her chair, a constant reminder of the world she now navigated. Elena, 47, was a former Marine Staff Sergeant who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan, her body bearing the scars of a war that had taken both her legs. The wheelchair wasn't just a necessity. It was a testament to her survival, a choice she made over the prosthetic limbs that felt like a betrayal of her body's truth. A small Marine Corps pin gleamed on her jacket, a quiet badge of honor she wore with pride, even if she rarely spoke of it. If you're moved by stories of courage, patriotism, and the unbreakable spirit of veterans, this tale will stir your heart. At Daily Narrated Stories, we bring you touching narratives that honor those who've sacrificed for our country. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers by hitting that subscribe button now. Your support keeps these stories alive. Elena Martinez worked short shifts during the lunch rush, folding napkins with the precision of someone who'd once defused bombs under pressure, her scarred hands moving in a rhythm that steadied her racing mind. The manager, a gruff man named Carl, kept her hours light, his grumbling exterior hiding a soft spot for Elena. He'd lost a brother in Iraq and saw her as a kind of unspoken kin. Elena never complained about the limited hours. She wasn't here for pity, only purpose. The diner was her sanctuary, a place where she could keep her hands busy and her thoughts at bay. The creak of her wheelchair was a constant companion, a sound that grounded her in the present, even as her mind often drifted to the past. Most days, the regulars left her alone. Some offered a respectful nod, their eyes lingering on her pin with a flicker of admiration, while others averted their gaze, as if her missing limbs made them uneasy. Elena didn't care for their discomfort. She preferred the quiet, the predictability of her routine. Roll, fold, place, repeat. It was a mantra that kept her steady. In her jacket pocket, a battered leather wallet held a single photograph. Her unit in the Afghan desert, laughing under a blazing sun, their faces smeared with dust but alive with camaraderie. Scrawled on the back in faded ink were the words, "She held us together." She hadn't looked at it in years, not because she'd forgotten, but because the memory was too heavy, too raw. Today, though, she felt its weight more than usual, a quiet premonition she couldn't shake. Her fingers brushed against the wallet as she folded another napkin, her calloused hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the ghost that lingered in her bones. Elena had survived ambushes, IEDs, and the loss of her comrades, but the civilian world had its own battles, one she fought with silence and stoicism. She didn't know it yet, but today, that silence would be tested in ways she hadn't faced since the war. As Elena folded another napkin, her mind drifted to that day in Kandahar, a memory so vivid it felt like a physical pull. The air had been thick with dust, the Humvee ahead of her erupting in flames after an IED blast. The explosion so loud it swallowed every other sound. She could still hear the screams of her unit, feel the heat searing her face as she crawled through the wreckage, her own legs burning from shrapnel. "Stay with me," she'd whispered to her wounded corporal, a young man named Daniels, his face pale with shock as she dragged him to safety. Her hands, slick with blood, hers, she couldn't tell, gripped him tightly, her voice steady despite the chaos. Bullets whizzed past, the enemy closing in, but Elena didn't falter. She'd pulled 2 others from the wreckage that day, her body screaming in protest, her legs already torn by the blast. That moment defined her. Courage under fire. But it also left her with scars, both visible and hidden, that she carried into this diner every day. The memory of Daniel's grateful eyes as medics took over haunted her, a reminder of what she'd lost and what she'd saved. She blinked, the diner coming back into focus, the napkin in her hand crumpled from her tightened grip. She smoothed it out with deliberate care, her breath shallow as she pushed the memory down, locking it away where it couldn't hurt her. At least, not yet. The diner's peace shattered when the door burst open, the bell above it jangling violently, its sharp ring cutting through the hum of quiet conversation. 3 men strode in, their heavy boots thudding against the floor, each step a declaration of dominance. They wore faded leather jackets with patches that read Bear, Hawk, and Claw, their presence filling the room like a storm cloud. Their laughter was sharp, the kind that demanded attention, the kind that made the air feel heavier, more dangerous. Elena felt the shift immediately, her instincts kicking in, the same instincts that had kept her alive in war zones, the ones that told her to assess, to wait, to survive. She didn't look up, but her grip on the napkin tightened, her knuckles whitening as she forced herself to keep folding, to keep breathing. Her heart thudded in her chest, a steady drumbeat of caution. Bear, the leader, had a scar running down his cheek, a jagged line that twisted his sneer into something menacing. His voice boomed like thunder as he spotted Elena, his eyes narrowing with cruel amusement. "Look at this," he sneered, nudging Hawk with an elbow. "What's a cripple doing in a place like this? Shouldn't she be at some rehab joint, begging for scraps?" Hawk laughed, a grating sound that scraped against Elena's nerves, making her jaw clench. Claw, the quietest of the 3, leaned against the counter and rang the service bell repeatedly, the shrill sound echoing through the diner. "Hey, where's the service? Or is the gimp slowing things down?" he called, his voice dripping with mockery. Elena kept her focus on her task, her jaw tight, her eyes fixed on the napkin in her hands. She'd faced worse than insults, enemy fire, ambushes, the screams of her dying friends. But here, in this small diner, the words stung differently. They weren't just an attack on her. They were an attack on everything she'd fought for, everything she'd lost. Her Marine Corps pin caught the light as she shifted slightly, a silent reminder of who she was, even if these men couldn't see it. The couple at the next table shifted uncomfortably, their forks pausing mid-bite, but they said nothing. The waitress, a young woman named Sarah, glanced over, her eyes wide with unease, then busied herself with a rag, wiping the same spot on the counter over and over. Elena wheeled over to their table, her movements steady despite the tremor in her chest, a quiet storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. "Would you like today's special?" she asked, her voice firm but controlled, a soldier's voice, one that had given orders under fire. Bear smirked, leaning forward, his breath reeking of stale beer and cigarettes. "Sure, soldier girl. Roll it over quick. Don't want to catch whatever you've got," he said, his words slicing through the air like a blade. The venom in his tone was deliberate, meant to wound, meant to humiliate. Elena's hands tightened on the handles of her chair, but she didn't flinch. She placed the menus down with the same precision she'd used to fold napkins, her movements a silent act of defiance. The taunts continued, each one a dagger aimed at Elena's pride, each one chipping away at the armor she'd built over years of survival. Hawk leaned back in his chair, his boots taking up more space than necessary, his posture a challenge to the room. "Bet she's just here for the handouts," he said, loud enough for the whole diner to hear, his voice dripping with disdain. "Probably never even saw combat. Just another sob story looking for sympathy." Bear nodded, his sneer widening. "They let anyone into the military these days, huh? Probably just pushed papers and called it a fight," he added, his words a deliberate provocation. Elena's hands paused, her heart pounding as memories of blood-soaked sand flooded her mind. She saw Daniel's face again, his eyes wide with fear as she dragged him from the burning Humvee, her own legs screaming in agony. She wanted to scream at these men, to tell them she'd carried soldiers twice her size to safety, that she'd earned every scar, every sleepless night, every phantom pain that still woke her in the dark. But she swallowed the words, her throat tight with the effort. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She'd survived worse than them, and she'd survive this too. Her fingers resumed folding the napkin, but her movements were slower now, each fold a battle to keep her composure. The diner's silence was deafening, the patron's avoidance a weight on Elena's shoulders. A man in a corner booth coughed awkwardly, his eyes fixed on his plate. A woman near the window adjusted her scarf, her hands trembling slightly as she avoided looking at Elena. The indifference stung almost as much as the thug's words. It was a reminder of how invisible she'd become, how her sacrifices had faded into the background of a world that moved on without her. Elena's chest tightened, a familiar ache settling in, the kind that came from years of being seen as less than what she was. But she pushed it down, her training kicking in, focus, assess, endure. Claw stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor with a screech that made Elena's skin crawl. He stalked toward her as she poured coffee at the station, her back to him, her hands steady despite the storm inside her. "You ignoring us, soldier girl?" he slurred, his breath hot with the stench of cheap beer, his voice a low growl that sent a shiver down her spine. Elena turned slightly, her eyes calculating, her mind racing through scenarios. He was bigger, but his movements were sloppy, his stance unsteady. She could take him if she had to, but she didn't want to. Not here, not like this. She'd fought enough battles for one lifetime. Without warning, Claw grabbed the handles of her wheelchair and yanked it forward with a violent jerk, his laughter a cruel echo in the quiet diner. The front wheel caught on a table leg, and the tray, on Elena's lap, crashed to the floor, the sound of shattering ceramic piercing the air. Hot coffee scalded her arm, the pain sharp and immediate, a burning reminder of her vulnerability. A spoon clattered across the tiles, skittering to a stop near the counter, and Elena's body hit the ground with a sickening thud, her right arm twisting awkwardly beneath her. The impact sent a jolt of pain through her, her breath catching as the diner spun around her, the fluorescent lights blurring into a haze. As she lay there, the sticky floor cold against her cheek, Elena's mind raced, a torrent of memories and emotions threatening to drown her. Not again, she thought, the memory of her last fall in Afghanistan flashing before her eyes. The explosion, the searing pain, the screams of her unit as the world burned around them. Humiliation burned hotter than the coffee, soaking her jacket, hotter than the shrapnel that had torn through her legs all those years ago. She could feel every eye in the diner on her, their silence a heavier weight than the fall, a heavier weight than the grief she carried. Her wallet had slipped from her pocket, the photograph of her unit spilling out onto the floor, its edges curling from years of wear. She held us together. The inscription read, a reminder of the woman she used to be, the woman she feared she'd lost. Elena's hands pressed against the floor, the stickiness clinging to her palms as she fought to steady her breathing. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. She'd survived ambushes. She'd survived loss. She'd survived the nightmares that came every night. She would survive this. But the shame was a living thing, coiling around her heart, whispering that she was weak, that she was nothing, that her sacrifices meant nothing to a world that let men like these walk free. She pushed the thought away, her jaw clenching as she focused on the photograph, on the faces of her unit, on the promise she'd made to never break. The diner was frozen, a tableau of cowardice and cruelty. Sarah gasped but stayed rooted behind the counter, her hands trembling as she clutched the rag, her eyes darting between Elena and the thugs. A family near the door stared into their plates, the father whispering to his wife to stay quiet, their avoidance a silent betrayal. A teenage boy at the counter stopped chewing, his burger forgotten, but he didn't move. Bear laughed, a low, satisfied chuckle that made Elena's stomach churn as Hawk and Claw joined in, their voices a chorus of malice. "Guess she's not so tough after all," Hawk said, his tone smug, his eyes gleaming with cruel delight. Elena pushed herself up, her arms trembling not from weakness, but from rage she refused to show, a fire burning in her chest that she hadn't felt since the war. Her soaked jacket clung to her skin, the coffee staining her Marine Corps pin, but she didn't care. She righted her wheelchair with a single, firm motion, the creak of the wheels a battle cry in the silent diner. She climbed back in, her movements deliberate, her face a mask of calm that hid the storm inside her. The photograph lay on the floor, a beacon of her past strength, and she reached for it with shaking hands, tucking it back into her wallet. She wouldn't let them take that from her. Not her pride, not her memories, not her identity. At a booth by the window, a 10-year-old girl named Lily watched, her eyes wide with shock, her small hands clutching the edge of the table. "Papa! Is she a soldier?" she whispered to her father, a man in a faded jacket with patches from Iraq, his face etched with lines of grief and pride. His name was Marcus, a former Marine himself, and he looked at Elena, her steady hands, her clenched jaw, the photograph she'd tucked away, and nodded slowly. "Yes, Lily, a real one," he said, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Marcus stood, his movements deliberate, his posture straight despite the weight of his own memories. He walked to the door, pulling out his phone, his fingers steady as he dialed a number. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the gravel lot, the air heavy with the scent of dust and gasoline. Marcus stood by his truck, his voice low but urgent as he spoke into the phone. "This is Sergeant Lopez. I need a team at Daisy Diner. One of ours is in trouble," he said, his tone carrying the weight of a man who'd seen too much to let this stand. A pause, then, "No, not official. But you'll want to be here. Trust me." He hung up, his eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for the moment he knew would come, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and hope. Back inside, the thugs grew bolder, their laughter filling the diner, as if nothing had happened. Bear waved for another coffee, his voice dripping with mockery. "Hey, soldier girl, you're gonna serve us, or are you too busy playing victim?" he called, his words a taunt that echoed through the room. Hawk chimed in, "Maybe she's waiting for a medal for falling," his laughter sharp and mean, his eyes glinting with malice. Elena sat in her corner, her hands folded, her posture rigid, her eyes burning with a fire she hadn't felt in years. The tension in the room was palpable, the patron's silence a ticking clock counting down to something inevitable. Outside, the faint sound of tires on gravel grew louder, a sound that didn't belong to any civilian car, a sound that carried the weight of authority. The thugs didn't notice, too caught up in their own arrogance, but Elena did. Her heart quickened, not with fear, but with anticipation, a flicker of hope she hadn't dared to feel until now. A black SUV rolled into view, its Marine Corps insignia gleaming in the sunlight, its engine idling with a quiet authority that silenced the diner, the thugs' laughter dying in their throats as the door opened. The door opened with a slow, deliberate creak, and 3 Marines stepped inside. The first was Master Sergeant Carter, a broad-shouldered man with graying hair and a cane that tapped the floor with authority. Behind him was Corporal Evans, a young man with a sharp jaw and an empty wheelchair in tow. The third was Captain Alvarez, a woman whose uniform bore a row of medals that shimmered under the diner's lights. Her presence alone shifted the room's energy, the air growing heavy with expectation. Carter stopped in front of Elena's table, his eyes scanning her with a mix of pride and fury. He squared his shoulders and saluted, his voice steady. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, apologies for the delay," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Elena returned the salute, her movements sharp, and for the first time that day, a spark of recognition lit her eyes. The diner was a statue gallery. No one dared to move. Captain Alvarez stepped forward, her gaze sweeping the room before settling on the thugs. "We receive a report of a decorated Marine being harassed on civilian ground," Alvarez said, her voice calm but cutting. "And that physical assault was involved." Her eyes locked on Bear, Hawk, and Claw, who shrank under her stare. Elena shook her head slightly. "It's nothing," she murmured, but Carter's voice cut through. "With respect, Staff Sergeant, it is not nothing. No one touches one of ours. Not in war, not in peace," he declared. Corporal Evans spoke next, his voice trembling with gratitude. "Staff Sergeant Martinez saved my life in Afghanistan. She pulled me from a burning Humvee after an IED hit. I wouldn't be here without her," he said, his eyes glistening. Elena looked at him, recognition dawning. "Private Evans," she said softly. "Corporal now, ma'am," he replied with a nod. "Thanks to you." Across the diner, Lily stood, her small frame trembling with awe. Marcus stood beside her, offering a silent salute. An elderly man in a Vietnam War cap followed, then a young woman in a National Guard hoodie. Within moments, half the diner was on its feet, a quiet wave of solidarity that drowned out the thugs' earlier dominance. Bear looked away, Hawk sank into his seat, and Claw's hands fidgeted nervously. Elena didn't speak, didn't move, but in that moment, she owned the room, without ever raising her voice. As the patron stood, Elena's hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from a warmth she hadn't felt in years. She thought of her unit, the ones she'd lost, the ones she'd saved. The diner's silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was a blanket of respect, wrapping around her like the desert sun had once done. Captain Alvarez turned to the thugs, her voice low but firm. "You picked the wrong Marine to mess with," she said, her words a promise of accountability. The thugs said nothing, their earlier bravado gone. Elena met Alvarez's gaze, and for the first time in a long time, she felt seen, not as a disabled veteran, but as a warrior. The Marines didn't leave immediately. They stayed, their presence a shield, ensuring Elena's dignity was restored. The diner's air hummed with a new energy, one of justice and unity. A month later, the Daisy Diner was no more. A new sign hung out front, painted in bold red, white, and blue, Patriot's Haven, with the words honor on the menu etched below. Inside, the changes were subtle but profound. A wall near the entrance displayed framed photographs of local veterans, some in crisp uniforms, others in faded fatigues, all staring forward with pride. The booth where the thugs had sat remained empty, not by rule, but by choice. No one wanted to sit where disrespect had once reigned. Elena still came every afternoon, folding napkins with the same precision, but now her Marine Corps pins sat proudly on her chest, no longer hidden. A small flag patch, weathered but vibrant, was taped to the back of her wheelchair, catching the light as she moved. Patrons greeted her now, some with words of thanks, others with quiet nods. A plaque above her booth read, "Reserved for those who served. All gave some gave all." Carl, the manager, had changed too. He now wore a tie with a flag pin, and he'd hired 3 more veterans that month, 1 in the kitchen, 2 for evening shifts. Sarah, the waitress, had learned to ask Elena about her service with curiosity, not pity, and could now name every rank from private to colonel. The Marines, Carter, Alvarez, and Evans, returned every Tuesday at 1800 hours, sharing coffee and stories with Elena, their laughter a quiet balm to her scars. What began as a moment of cruelty had transformed a diner, a town, and a woman who'd once felt invisible. Elena didn't smile often, but when she did, it was a sunrise after a long, dark night. This story isn't just about Elena. It's about every veteran who's ever felt overlooked, every hero who's sacrificed for our freedom. Take a moment to reflect. Who in your life has served with courage? Share their story in the comments below, or simply type honor to stand with veterans everywhere. Let's show our gratitude for those who've given so much for our country. The town itself had shifted. Elena spoke at the local middle school, teaching students that a uniform isn't about war. It's about duty, honor, and carrying others when they can't stand. Businesses began offering veteran discounts, and a memorial was erected in the town square, a simple granite slab inscribed, for those who served and those who stood beside them. The thugs never returned. Whispers said Bear had been fired after a viral video exposed his behavior, but Elena didn't care. She had bigger things to focus on, like mentoring a young female recruit who now visited every Friday, eager to learn about boot camp. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, a young man in a fresh Navy uniform stepped into Patriot's Haven, his hands trembling as he held his cap. Elena wheeled over, her flag patch glowing in the golden light. "First deployment?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Tomorrow, ma'am." She gestured to her table. "Sit. Coffee's good, company's better." He sat, and Carter raised his mug in a silent toast, joined by every veteran in the room. The message was clear. You are seen, you belong, you'll never be alone. Elena had found her home, not just in the diner, but in the community she'd inspired. At Daily Narrated Stories, we believe every story of courage deserves to be heard. Elena's journey reminds us that veterans are the heartbeat of our nation. Let's honor them together. Don't wait. Subscribe now to join our mission of reaching 1,000 subscribers and keeping these life-changing stories alive. Type honor in the comments, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and let's build a community that never lets a veteran stand alone. Act now, because their sacrifices demand our action today.